Welcome to ClickPoint, where we explore how this powerful combination transforms lives across industries like education, technology, venture capital, and sustainability. Today, we are speaking to Christian Long, who is the founder and guide at Bonfire Workshop. Bonfire Workshop is an organization that leverages human connection and nature to help leaders and teams create the conditions to shape remarkable futures together. The really interesting bit that we get into in this conversation is about redefining technology through the lens of human interaction. Let's get into it. Okay, I'm so excited. Once again, I think this is a podcast in name only, because really what it is, it's an excuse for me to talk to people that either I'm really good friends with or people that I'm kind of friends with that I really like. And this is a great episode because I get to talk to someone who's both from my perspective. I don't know what your thoughts are on this, Christian, but from my world, when I think of you, I'm like, man, I get to talk to Christian today. This is great. How are you doing today, sir?
Dude, I so appreciate you, Kwaku. I am feeling lots of gratitude to be here. And I just wish I got to be with you where you are, but I will be
We're working on
grateful.
Rectifying that. We're working on making that happen more often.
Yes.
That's going to be the next call, the one that other people don't hear until we plan the thing. See how we're starting this off with a mystery? All right. I should dip into this. Your time is valuable. And this first question, I feel like I ask every guest or every person that comes on the podcast. I hate the term guest, but as part of this conversation, I ask them the same question. And this one will be particularly interesting for the work that I know that you currently do. So here we go. What inspired you to start using technology within your current role?
I'm gonna not assume digital is connected to technology for a split second.
You can assume what you want.
Yeah. So the technology for me is conversation. Like, it all roots in having the privilege of being with somebody and not assuming where the conversation is going to go. So if I just treat that as kind of default technology, so that is the platform, or that is the way in which we will. And the second part of technology, if I can be intentional, it's we better go on a walk, or we better ask why we're sitting still instead of going on a walk. And I don't mean that as a metaphor. Like, how can we be in conversation together and be shoulder to shoulder and be walking that way together, and give ourselves permission to be madly curious about what each of us is thinking and imagining and wrestling with? And then how can we not assume how that conversation is going to play out?
So that's interesting. Your response is, so first of all, technology is conversation. That t-shirt it screen prints itself. It's not the direction I thought you were going to go in. I thought you were going to talk about biomimicry and basically that nature is technology, which is similar. But in this way, I think that you and I relate as far as the source code of the interactions or the impact that we have on people is usually rooted in conversation. Oh, this is going to be a good one, because I'm going to push and pull on this tension of what technology is and versus what it is to you and the stuff that it is that you do. So, okay, if let's go down this road a little bit. If technology is the conversation, would you say, and you mentioned the whole thing about taking a walk, which I love walking meetings. It's one of my favorite things to do. And I just asked you not to do this, but recently, I'm going to be amorphous. There was a statement made about how sitting is the new smoking.
By the way, I was so hoping you were going to say, I'm going to be Morpheus. I was really like, can I interrupt? Like if you had just said,
no, you can't.
Just
No,
follow me here. I'm Morpheus. And obviously you assume a red pill, blue pill, but I'm going to go a different direction. I would have been like, let's go, brother. Let's go. But you didn't. You meant to morph, to be capable
I'm aligning with your premise here. I'm morphing with your perspective.
Let's do this.
Besides, I look nothing like that actor. All right. You were talking about like how you like to walk with people, and I love that. So if technology is conversation, within that, how would you define the hardware and software of that premise?
All right. That's not what I wrote down when I diligently prepared for this conversation.
I mean, these are your words.
I can't rely on any of my prep.
Good.
Okay. Tell me what those two elements are again.
You said technology is conversation.
Yes.
And you were talking about walking shoulder, and you can pull from some of the other stuff you said. Walking shoulder to shoulder. Why are we sitting still? Why are we not in movement together, legs synced, all of that? So within that premise, if technology is conversation, what is the hardware of this form of technology, and what is the software?
Okay. So hardware, I mean, there's a really obvious literalness. Like if you and I are walking and we're in conversation, the hardware is our ability to ask the question that emerges, right? Like the hardware is the way it's facilitated, the way that it has form and function, is it arises not in here's the answer, but it arises in the form of a question. Right. And we could be super stoked about curiosity. We could be really drawn into the idea that we're building something in real time together, that the physicality, the materiality is our ability to discover the next possible question. So if I sort of think, and I'm just thinking out loud, I literally am making this up because
that was the goal.
So if I think about hardware, like the form, then the software is our ability to listen.
Oh, man, you pulled that one out.
Yeah, that was made up, but I'm going to go with it for now.
That is great. Okay. So, I mean, if people have stuck this far, when I say this far, meaning they've listened to multiple episodes of this podcast.
I just figured this is going to be like a 30-second TikTok reel. You're going to drop in with a provocative but ambiguous lead.
No, you brought that to the table. Obviously, that was your assignment for the cookout. If people have listened to multiple episodes already, you're starting this off in a very different way, which I love. And if you're at this point, because the intros to these shows are really short, I've probably defined, because I haven't recorded it yet, I've probably defined your role, something along these lines, part educator, part designer, part shaman, and leveraging nature and curiosity to help people define the better version of themselves. In fact, I might use what I just made up right there.
Yeah, just get the transcript of that.
Just going to pull that one bite, that one sound bite. So, and I don't often do this, but because you are truly a unicorn in your practice and in the way that you see the world, if I were to pressure you to write the intro for me, to describe you, Christian is, what would you say?
I am at the beginning of a 30-year journey to splitting kindling for a fire that others will build. And so metaphor aside, I turned 55 in the weeks, like the immediate weeks ahead. And in 30 years, there's an 85-year-old version of me that will live, call it a retreat center. It doesn't necessarily need to be named as such, but in 30 years, a version of me will live on the property of a retreat center that I've little by little sort of brought into being. And I hope that I am sitting by a fireplace and I'm putting kindling next to that fireplace, and there's a group that's assembled, and it's their event, their experience, their community. And so I mean that in a really practical terms. Like up until recent months, year, I would have said, and I would have immediately positioned myself inside a career term. Like, I'm a designer, I'm an educator, I do X, Y, Z. None of that feels true, but all of that got me here. And now I feel that I'm just trying to create the conditions so that people can show up and really be present for each other and ask each other the right question. And I can see a very clear vision of that in space and place and in experience. And I just sit at the very beginning of that. And I've got 30 years to, little by little, make that more and more true.
The only thing I'd push back on, first of all, that was beautiful, what you just described. And no, I need you to own it. So we're just going to say that it was. The only thing I would push back is it could be 40. Modern medicine is doing amazing stuff these days.
Fair enough. We could biohack our way to a year 40.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm not questioning your scientific wherewithal or aspiration.
Oh, no, if I were you, I definitely would question that. But I should not be your doctor is essentially what I'm saying to you right now. So, all right, this is really great because I'm going to ask all these questions and I'll be using the word technology in them. And it'll be really interesting for you to answer them from the perspective, like in the way that you sort of define technology from the beginning of this conversation.
Okay. And I'm happy to code switch into like the sort of common usage of technology in 2025 too, or at least ways that I think about it in those terms too.
Yeah. Do what feels good. Do what feels right. Trust your instincts.
Let's do that.
So this actually ties into what you just said as far as like all these different roles. And I love, I feel like I feel a kinship, a similarity, a brotherhood to you in this way of I've had personally all of these different roles that have led me to, and I mean this in the best possible way, to define like making it my own thing. That sort of defines the value that I bring to places and spaces. And so, and for me, actually, I won't be so obtuse. For me, it's like, I've been a musician, I've been an educator, I've been a designer, a bit of a technologist in certain formats. And I think that's where the premise of this came from. The idea of how do you bring these two things together in a really beautiful way? Like if you're thinking in terms of a piece of art or like a musical instrument where you're combining like wood and metal in ways that lasts for years, but it's beautiful and it makes amazing sounds. Even if you just, you pick up that guitar for the first time in 10 years and it sounds like a guitar that was made 50 years ago. We have these things that define us. So this question for you is about kind of that journey for you. Once again, I ask this question a lot. How has your personal journey influenced your approach to leveraging technology or a conversation to create impact in the work that you do?
Okay. So where I find myself leaning right now is historically, so it's last 30 years of my career, in a classroom, in a workshop, in a conference, designing a campus, whatever it may be. I would have used the very same technology. So the conversation is technology. I would have used that in a Socratic seminar as a young English teacher with high school students, helping them think about not so much what they know, but what lies just outside of what they know. So I think in some respects, the table stakes have risen for me in that realm. But what I did over the last 30 years, based on that maybe starting point or orientation, is I was either geeked out or driven by ego, whatever it means to be human and a young professional. But I was really captivated by the idea that if you could ask the right question, you could get to the right answer. And I think in some respects that is true and noble and simple. And as an educator, as a consultant, as a designer, as a member of a team, as somebody being an entrepreneur, that's always true and always useful. But I find myself less and less curious about the right answer and exponentially more interested in what we don't know and how to actually be like excited about the not knowing. So if I were to leapfrog today, so over 30 plus years of working and doing in different ways, I would say that I am just saying out loud that I don't pretend to know where it should go, but I really care that we're asking about it right now. And so as that plays out functionally, like in 3D dimensions, if I were in a conference room with a board of an organization and there was whatever the table stakes were for that project or that convening, I would have not that long ago been motivated by what do I mean by the future of learning, or what do I assume? What is my provocation about kind of what we have and where we should go next? And there's a lot of temptation to do that, right? It is really easy to get swept up in that. One, it feels purposeful, and two, it feels sexy and intriguing. And if you're paid to do that, you can flywheel yourself in that and just keep validating it over and over and over again. And what I find myself doing more and more now is shifting, like being in this conversation with you is interesting if I'm the one being interviewed, but it isn't anywhere close to what it is if I get to ask you questions in return. Like it just is so much more interesting to me if I could flip this conversation. But in the spirit of you asking that, I would say I am less and less captivated by or motivated by the need for that project to go in a particular direction. And I want to know more and more, why are we in the room or the meeting in the first place? And so whether I think I would have called that human-centered X or ethnographic Y, or like I would have couched it in some sound like a grown-up and get away with quickly, creating a constellation of all the things that lead there. But I think it's just really friggin' simple. Like, I don't want to take for granted that I know why we're here together. Why are we doing this work? And so the conversation isn't just the necessary to get to the prototype, to get to the project, to get to the realization, to like pull it off. The not knowing is where the good is. Like it's actually in the messy process that we figure out why we're doing it. Not let's resolve the messy process so we can talk about the case study one day, or we can win the next project, or we can be correct on stage. So that's what comes to mind right now, Kwaku. But tell me if what you, okay.
All of that resonates. Sorry, I'm cutting you off, which is the worst.
Good.
Right now,
No,
I'm modeling horrible hosting skills here. That I love. And so I'm going to push you a little more.
Cool.
Give me an example in your current work where you put that into practice. You don't have to use names. You don't have to use organizations. But something that you've done, and I'm going to ask you to couch both things, where you used conversation as your form of technology. And as we've been thinking about it, I don't think conversation's a technology in the way. I don't think it's technology as a whole. I think it could be the operating system, which would couch it under software. And it's like the base thing that everything connects to. But this is my opinion. I'm not taking away from what you said.
Dude, it's your show first and foremost. So you get to name the table.
Right now it's our show. Right now it's you and I. You can ask me questions too. All right. But give me an example where you, one, used conversation as your primary form of technology, and two, where you were able to shift a group of people to assign value to the spaces that they didn't know, as opposed to coming out with a product or like a tagline, if you will, to justify the time together and to sort of wrap up all the ideas in a neat sort of package.
Okay. I'm going to describe one that feels very much alive, but it took place in the last year, and another one that is about ready to release in 2 weeks. And they kind of show kind of a before and after. So really quickly, the first one was a school architect or campus architecture project. So just put it in the realm of a school, hired myself, and I built a team to partner with the school, and they were doing a massive they were redesigning in real time their existing campus. And we were brought on to help their educators and administrators and staff writ large, 1,100 student campus, about 250 adults employed by that campus, and a very successful school by any measure. And they were doing a massive physical reimagination of their existing campus. Mm-hmm. And we were brought on to help their staff, their professionals, prepare for that transition. Think about how they're going to use space and place, furniture, how they're going to integrate all the right aspirations about collaboration and agency and, the ability to transition quickly and be agile. So we were brought in to do that. And we had 13 months timeline of the project, right? From first meeting to deliverable. And from the proposal to first meeting through the first 6 months of that year plus, it very much came across based on what we were hired to do and what we believed we could do in return. It came across as, how do we help educators reimagine how they'll use space and furniture and objects and all that stuff. And based on inquiry, collaboration, and a couple of other known values. Yep. We got to month 6 multiple times on campus, from board members to head of school to folks who clean the school and first year staff members, and of course, kiddos and parents and alums. We were very much tacking towards that. So communication, whether it's an operating system or it's the technology, without debating that part, communication operated as a way to discern what people needed, what they were motivated by, and different ways of being strategic about future terms, if you make sense, like what the chairs should be and how people should move them and who has ownership of those chairs and all that stuff. And so communication was basic design process. Tell us more about that. What do you need? Let's prototype a couple of things. About halfway through that project, so at month 6, the team that I had the privilege of building, we looked at each other and went, it's the wrong project. All those things we can execute on, because what we realized as we were listening to them, that if we stayed true to an assumption, this is about space and place, this is about FF&E, which is a fancy architectural phrase for just furniture, like all the ways in which a space is kind of, it's built out, right? How you stage a space. We would be moving aggressively towards, here's how you should use space. What we began to realize as we listened is it was not a space problem. It was not a scheduling problem. Those things were worthy of solving for. It was a professionals had not been given time to define the ways in which they would work together over time in space. Meaning until they were given an opportunity to really say, who are we? What do we stand for? Kwaku, tell me what you're motivated to do, not just what I think you should do. It became a human project, not an object project. It became an experience project, not a space and time project. It became about relationships, not about where we do stuff, right? And call it collaboration. And so at month 6, we called an audible inside our team and said, if we're going to serve them ethically, morally, if we're going to double down on what matters, then we better be prepared to go that way, or we may risk getting away with good answers that doesn't have a lot of utility in their future. Like it would be window dressing with an extremely expensive budget, and everything would be correct. Been in a lot of architectural projects with schools around the world. It would be correct, but we would have missed what the community needed. And so we made a decision. So it was through listening. Not that we were clever in our workshopping stuff, but through listening, we went, we asked all the wrong questions. And when they hired us, I'm not saying they were wrong in what they asked us, but they hadn't given themselves permission to ask the questions that would have really challenged us. So there's a project that was not that long ago that has come to a conclusion, but has changed everything for me. And I could go into much more detail about it if we had more time, but let's just pause there. What I would say, I have a project that launches in 2 weeks. So we're in the final putting everything up, getting ready for people to kind of walk in the door. And in this case, it's an online course for heads of schools, of international schools around the world. And they're all going to be focused on transformative learning spaces for transformative learning. So the name of the course is Transformative Learning Spaces for Transformative Learning. They're coming into a very much an online course like ecosystem. And we were given, my partner is the head of a remarkable school in Beijing. She's one of the most respected heads of schools around the world. She's led many architectural projects in multiple countries as a head of school. So she really understands, empathizes with the participants, which are heads of schools. And we were given this opportunity to design a course. Now, on the surface, it is how to design a school that's transformative, how to design a really remarkable 21st century school, et cetera. And we said, what if we don't assume this is about construction? What if we don't assume this is about furniture? We don't assume it's about remarkable, incredible school spaces. What if we said this is about how to help heads of school creatively position themselves to lead their community creatively so that they can one day write the design brief that architects and partners would respond to. But let's not rush to the design brief. Let's not rush to how do we fund it? How do we pour concrete? How do we make sure we get the makerspace tooled up, et cetera? What if we said this is about culture and relationships long before it becomes about space and place? So only because of that previous project and dozens upon dozens before it, would we have even said, what if we listened differently and we therefore asked different questions? So we've invited a whole series of globally renowned school architects, like best of class. And we said, would you answer these questions that basically say, what would you want your clients talking about before they ever hired you?
Oh, love that.
Right? So just to bring a point to a conclusion. So we shifted in the last several months from how do we help design great schools, which is a totally noble and realistic approach. Like it's what people need to eventually do, to wait a minute, what do they need to do first? And I think on some level that is, they have to double down on their why they exist in the first place and double down on how do we become a community of designers and explorers and creatives and those who ask each other the right questions so that we can translate that into architectural terms. But also, and you get this, Kwaku, they could translate that into technology terms. They could translate that into HR terms. They could translate that into admissions terms. Meaning, if they have the right conversation about why they exist and what they want to make possible, then they can translate that into whatever medium or modality they need to, but they're inherently aligned with why they are a learning community. Not when we do architecture, we use this language. And when we do assessment, we do this. And AI, well, oh my gosh, over here we do. What we just want these school leaders to do is to say, double down on why you exist as a community in the first place and prepare yourself long before the architect shows up and you suddenly code switch into square footage or square meters or whatever it is. So I'll hit pause there.
Man, there's so much there. There's so much there. Now you have me stumped because I had another question that I was going to
ask that question.
Queue up. But there's so much there that I want to dive into. Specifically,
what does it make you curious about? Not what's the question I should answer. Because I don't know if that's the right thing, but I can tell you it feels right.
Well, what it makes me curious about, one, is having the ability to reflect on where you are midstream in a project with deliverables and responsibilities, and there's numbers and finances attached to it. And to be able to say, you know what, we're asking the wrong question. Because, I've definitely had this experience, and I know you have, and I'm assuming someone who's listening has, where you're working on a project and you're like, nope, this is not what they need. And so that you've reached that point, this is not what they need.
Yeah.
And then you have to go through the mental gymnastics around, all right, do I have this conversation with them? One, are they going to be receptive to it? Two, if they're not receptive, are they going to be like, maybe you're not the person that I need? And I'm going to find someone else who's going to do that. So there's the self-reflection piece, there's the courage, and then there's the ability to frame it in a way that does not create a sense of blame or like a wrong or right in this scenario, but more, and maybe this is tying into the larger question, which was being excited by the things that are just beyond our reach. How do you get people to connect or buy into that chase? Because most people, and this is 1,000% a generalization, but there is a need for, what are we doing? I know we're doing this. Great. If I know we're doing this, I feel safe because I know where I'm going, and not necessarily wanting to lean into this uncomfortable, well, I'm not sure what we're doing because we're looking at something that I don't fully understand. So why am I here? You know, when there's so, especially within, I mean, I think this applies across social impact work, across business, but especially in education, there's so many other things I could be doing. And I don't necessarily, it's like I kind of feel it, but I don't see the direct connection to what it is I need to be doing, as opposed to.
Let's take that really seriously. So if any one of us are in a situation like that, right? You can think it and feel it long before you express it. So let's imagine you're at the point of sharing it with a teammate or a colleague, or sharing it with a client or a community. So you're at that kind of in that liminal space, and you haven't yet said it, right? I think it's both easier and morally appropriate to do so when you do it so that they can lean in to what is deeply true on their terms. So it's not, I don't know what I'm doing, or it's razzle dazzle, or it's a shift for the sake of modernity or something. But instead it's, let's go to what will always be true. And if that's the case, I think then that partner, that colleague, that person, group, organization, community you're serving is on a position of strength, as opposed to in all of these projects. And I don't care if you're installing a new phone system on a campus, or you're trying to integrate a new math software program. I don't care what it is, but if that person you're serving or you're partnering with, or you're really trying to help them get from here to there, if they're able to trust and rely on what they deeply know, you're going to learn. You're just going to be doing better together. I think it's when we're trying to be right at the expense of doing what's right. Or we're trying to sound like we're right. And, I think over and over and over again, we're in situations with a team. Let's just say you're a team of 3 people and you've got a deliverable in 6 months, and it's the scale of impact is pretty modest. No one's going to be harmed by it, but you have some ego involved and you got a budget. Like, let's put it in like, hey, I've got to get this project out the door in 3 weeks. If you're 1 degree off at the point of starting, like you're 1 degree off. Yeah. Right. Just literally in terms of a compass heading. And it's 3 weeks out, and you get 3 weeks out, you're probably not that far off, even if you didn't make sense of everything. Yeah. But if you're talking about something that's going to have impact generationally, right?
1 degree adds up.
1 degree is really significant when you get just a little beyond today. Yeah. And so if you walk in the door to that meeting or that project, or your role in that meeting or project, and you're like, I know what I know, and I'm just going to hold tight. And you don't say, but what if I'm not right once we get out a ways? And so you don't afford yourself, or you don't just come clean, or you don't just say, hey, listen, before we go to what I believe is right, let's reverse the scenario. Let's imagine everything we know is not true, or, you don't call it foresight or future think. You don't try to put it in some new theory of action. You just go, okay, let's not assume. And you get further out. I think we're culpable at the very least. Like we might be right in the terms of the project, but we might be wrong in terms of what it leads to. And I think so if the posture is just, let me be curious a little bit longer, let us prototype, not to get to a solution, but to develop a disposition of prototyping. Let us say, here's what I think, but tell me more about what you think. Yeah. I think at the end of the day, it's no more complicated than that. I don't think it's some crazy reconstitution of like business strategy or being a lead learner in a learning community. Like, I think at the end of the day, it's just like, here's what I know. So what do I not know? Or I have an idea, but tell me more about your idea. I think if we can do that now, does it get complicated if there's a budget? Does it get complicated if people have been communicated one thing and then all of a sudden the terms change? So I think you have to be humane, and you have to be humble enough to say, okay, with intention, in good faith, here's what we're seeing. And if your partner is given an opportunity to say, it becomes a little bit more of a tightrope act if you're like, we're just going to pivot.
Without
you got to have some trust in that. And I think you figure it out in real time what's going to work. But over the course, so put it in last term. I think everything we've talked about, if we just put it at the scale of a single 45-minute classroom with a bunch of eighth graders, if it's right and decent and honest at that scale, it's probably right, decent, and honest at the scale of working with a whole organization. So if we're really talking about learning, and learning in the future is about curiosity and critical thinking, I think what we're talking about is like, wait a minute, what's the question I haven't asked yet? Okay. What have you not told me yet, right?
So and I love this about you, because you will wax so poetically about something that is nuanced and complex and make it feel so accessible, which I think is one of your gifts as just a communicator. And the thing that I feel, and I'm going to push back with a compliment, that you are downplaying is your relationship and community building skills to be able to make that 1 degree pivot. And so this actually is great, because now this ties into the next question I was going to ask you.
Let's do it.
How do you, and this, I don't even know if this is something you're aware of, but how do you do such a great job of cultivating and building these relationships at scale?
Can you rephrase that? Everything you said makes sense. Can you just add a sentence or two to that so I can think in motion?
You cannot, in order to empower people to embrace chasing what they don't know as a core part of any sort of project, there has to be a level of trust. There has to be a level of belief. There has to be a level of vulnerability, which comes from relationship building. And you do that really well. How do you, but you've also done it in small groups. You've done it over time. What is, and this is a really easy question to answer. This is a lie. How do you create and scale your relationships in a way that people trust you? Like, we're having this conversation now. It's like, yeah, it's only 1 degree. Let's do it. Where people trust you to shift that with all of those other concerns, because that's what I'm saying. You're making it sound so easy. I'm involved with the project now, and I'm pretty sure we're on the right track with what we're doing. But I'm talking to you. I'm like, am I being responsible enough? Like, your ability to create relationships with people where they can feel vulnerable enough to follow you, whether it's 1 degree or 15 degrees off, and to change course in scenarios where there's so much on the line.
Okay. A lot in there. And I appreciate being given a chance to think about that. So I think the same data can be looked at in two different ways. So one way of answering your question is I, or whomever, but in this case, I have a unique ability to do X. And I think what I would say is there's some facilitation techniques. I think there's a little bit of like, you've been in certain experiences or projects or domains enough that you can see patterns as a gestalt or sort of a commonality. And I don't know if that's an interesting answer, so I'm not going to go that way. I think the other side is much more simple. So kind of like, it's just maybe a simple principle. And that is the relationship grows out of the vulnerability. The relationship, the ability to do together grows out of those primal human needs that we so often rush through to get to the project.
The example you were giving was around Skype.
Skype. So if you remember the kind of, it seems like forever ago, but it was a fairly blink of an eye moment ago, where we were suddenly talking about kind of 21st century classrooms in this kind of anecdote. I am in a classroom in Iowa or California or wherever I am, and somewhere across the world is another group of kiddos, and we suddenly come together through the power of Skype or any video platform. And it was kind of like, oh, it was a paradigm shift. We could be together despite being so far away. And and it was like compelling. And two things are off about that. It was almost always someone in the US, a classroom somewhere and everywhere USA, and then another group of kids in Singapore or Beijing. And you're like, they wouldn't be awake at the same time of day. But that was never part of the story, right? And that was the easy punchline to be like, oh, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. We know that really wouldn't happen, but the technology works, so let's ignore it. But what wasn't the story is Mrs. Jones in room 301 having a Skype conversation with Mr. Davis in room 302. Across the cinder block wall. And I've thought, how often do we become mesmerized by this opportunity to do this thing way out there? Some remarkable transformation, iteration, innovation. And the very people we walk by in the hallways are never part of our narrative. They're not. And what I mean by that is not the sort of like technology part. What I mean is, am I just as curious about Mr. Davis as I am about the theoretical classroom around the world? And if I'm not, then how can I exist in a learning community? There's a kickoff at the beginning of the school. There's something towards the end of the school. And somewhere in the middle, they have a PD moment where all of the staff come together. So as an outside consultant or designer or partner, what a great, that's a win to get that square footage, that space, that time. Okay. So we were given one of those within a project arc. And so the assumption going in is we better have one hell of a good keynote. We better deliver lots of data. We better help position them for the future. We better kind of win the moment. And our team spent all night. We're in a hotel conference room preparing to get to campus at 7:30 a.m. And we had everything built. We knew our roles. We had our talking points. We were going to transition. All of us were comfortable on stage. And no one expected anything other than us just delivering. Worst case scenario, we do a C-, but they're polite about it. Best case scenario, we give the Sir Ken Robinson keynote they talk about for the rest of their lives. Right. And as we got close to midnight, so we're now getting close to 7.5 hours until we wake up, have breakfast, go there. We looked at each other and went, this is wrong. And the reason is we focused, we focused on our deliverables. We focused on our perspective, and we shifted and went, wait a minute, they come together 3 times a year as an adult community. One is the week before school begins. One is the week after school ends. And then one moment in between. How often do they get to just be together? And we stopped and said, what do they deserve? Not what can we produce? And we said, how can we design for what they deserve? Not what we can talk about. So what we did, we literally in an hour, we said, let's throw away everything. We're talking weeks of development and a PowerPoint, everything you do to show up as a pro. And we were good at that stuff. And we said, what if we threw it away and we gave them 90 minutes together, but not in the, you guys just have the morning back, that cop out. We said, no, we come with a more intentional by design experience. And here's what we did. So this was a project where they had to think about their future, and they were nervous about it. And they also, nothing was communicated equally to everybody. So everybody had their own interpretation of it and their own, where they sat within that future narrative. And these are smart folks. These are pros. They might not all believe in the same things, but they're all credible. They're all experienced, and they all know something that we don't know. And we said, okay, you're going to spend, of our 90 minutes, you're going to spend an hour walking campus together with a partner. And you're going to do one thing. You're going to walk for an hour with a partner. Please don't walk with a partner you team teach with. Walk with somebody you haven't had the privilege of walking with anytime recently. So we were signaling, don't just be with your, 4th grade teacher buddy that you're always like,
don't be comfortable.
Be a little uncomfortable, but in the spirit of getting to know, and somebody gets to know you. And we said, walk with them. And here's all you need to do. Take each other on a walk and share with each other what makes you curious, but point to things, tell stories about things, and then come back in an hour and be ready to share what your partner introduced you to. That was it. Simple device. Simple. Here's the difference. Scenario 1, 90 minutes of 250 smart experienced adults
Slides.
with their arms crossed and talking to each other and probably multitasking with their phone and on Instagram at the same time, which I would do if I were in that audience, and also deciding and coming up and presenting all the facilitator tricks that we would pull out. You and your team break out, do this thing, present. We'll now create a pattern around all this stuff. And then we get to the end and they give us credit and high five and everyone's good and they go back to their day. Version 2, they came back laughing. They came back arm in arm. They came back, and the room, we were in a big gymnasium because that was the space they had. They were rocking. You look across the room, people were smiling. People were like facing each other. We brought them in and said, tell us a little something that your partner, people could not wait to get the microphone. It wasn't about the project. It wasn't about us. It wasn't them being dutiful and conscientious and, appropriate and civilized and all the things. Here's the thing. We also said along the way, take photographs and upload those to Padlet. So we got data. We wanted the same data. Take images of things that make you curious. That's what our whole deliverable was going to be anyway. But instead they came back and did that and they couldn't wait to tell other people about it. So we had the digital data. We had 450 submissions in an hour time period with great captions, great anecdotes, and we could connect it to people. But what we got in real time was a room full of energy of adults who had this experience. They felt that people cared about what they cared about. And they were doing it as a community. And when do they get to do that at scale with each other? Because if the future of learning is about professional collaboration, about agility, and about, adaptation, iteration, whatever the innovation word speak of the day is, and it's about humanity and teaming up and co-piloting with AI, all the things, we can focus on the indirect objects in that potential future, or we can start with, do you feel like anyone in this room knows what you care about? Is there anyone that's gone on a walk with you and held space for you? Did you feel any semblance of like curiosity and joy and, oh my God, with each other? Because I bet if you do, all that other stuff's going to come so much more easily. If not, we might get the codification right. We might get the articulation right. We might get the technology right, but we will never know if you and I heard each other. And so there was a really good example where we pivoted, but we did it with absolute integrity and intention. And we said the win isn't that we have a right theory of action. The win is people produce immediately and they care about each other even more as a result. So that to me is becoming the default table stakes. Like if you don't start with a version of that. So here's the simplest way. Kwaku, if you and I were going on a walk in the woods, which is part of the modality of what I do now, work with leaders and teams and individuals. And we use the simplicity of going on a walk and we talk. Typically, we would do that in terms of, tell me about your idea and I would give you recommendations. Or, hey, let's build this quickly. Let's iterate and kind of stand something up. Or we would debate. I don't care how you enter the conversation, but you would kind of take one of those postures. What we say is when your partner is telling you what they're thinking about, do not put yourself in their story. Do not make a recommendation. Don't rhetorically say, me too. Simply say, tell me more about. Or say nothing and just listen. Just listen. Now, when people come back from that walk, a number of things happen. The narrative they're used to saying, they run out of that narrative and they have to start a new narrative, which means they start talking about what really matters to them. 2, they realize that other person is holding space for them. 3, all of a sudden, most of the wisdom they needed was already there all along, but all of a sudden there's daylight and space to say, what are the things we hadn't yet thought about? And you get people, call it multidisciplinary, polyglot, I don't care. You have people saying, I don't know anything about that, but you just made me wicked curious about it. That culture, that dynamic, that interplay, make it really fucking simple. That relating to one another creates the conditions for the good. And it's happening in real time, not in some theoretical distant future. It's not in the 21st century, jobs of the future. It's just right now, you and me, we're already feeling it, which means if we are 1 degree off, you and I will give each other grace and go, we're 1 degree off. Let's back up a little bit. Tell me more about your idea. How might we, and if we're prototyping, iterating, experimenting, piloting, all that language we use, we're actually doing it. We're not just talking about prototyping to get to a solution that's guaranteed. We're saying, how do we embody the spirit of not knowing? And I think every time we have a cat poster on the wall of our classrooms, hang in there, and, the power, and we are a Rilke quote about living the questions, young man. Like, we actually do it. We don't just make it a keynote punchline. Like, we just do it, and we do it with each other every single time we cross paths with each other. That's what I am on my 30-year journey, literally that 55 to 85-year-old version of me. It's all there now, and I don't have to be good at it. I just have to be all in about it.
I normally come into these talks and I have like 40 questions, and then if I get through 10 of them, I'm like, all right, and I tied it together, and it's this math that I'm doing in my head to try to connect what I think the other person is saying with the focus of the show. And this has been truly powerful because you tied it together 1 degree at a time. But you took me out to left field, and then you brought me home in such a graceful and powerful way. Because, initially it's like, or whatever, the selling point of these conversations is technology versus human connection and all of that. And it was so artful, especially that example that you gave at the school with the teachers, how you basically encapsulated prioritizing connection and creating the culture, because I was writing some notes down, creating that culture that allows for grace where technology's there. It's not like you're doing something and you're like, I'm forgetting what the term is, but basically someone who doesn't want to use any technology whatsoever. But it also doesn't drive in this really authentic way not only your decision-making process within projects, but even like your interactions. And even, in the course of this, like this little chat, we've had a couple of tech issues, but it didn't drive anything. It's just something to move around. Unfortunately, because I'm trying to do shorter form podcasts, because me, this could be easily 3 hours. We've come to the end of our time. And at first I was like, oh man, that stinks. I have like 5 more questions. But the way you just wrap that up around how you build that culture around vulnerability, which empowers people to see slightly beyond what they think is possible because they feel comfortable, and they also have the ability to give each other grace. I cannot think of a better way, not only to end this podcast, but to define, at least at this point in your 30-year, because you obviously think of things in 30-year chunks, define what it is you do. Which, I feel like I say this with everybody, but it's the truth. If you are listening, and you're like, man, I need some of that in my life, I cannot encourage you more to do some research online, and connect with Christian and talk about how he can spark that fire within. See how I did that full circle? maybe even turn it into a bonfire within the work that you are currently engaged in. And that work can be personal or it can be professional, and it's, speaking personally, it is truly a gift to know you and be able to call you a friend, because each time I talk to you, I'm like, oh, I need to be doing this in this way. Not because, it's cool, but because it's like, oh, what he said just really resonated with me. And I see myself in what he just described. So I'm going to stop this entire long speech by saying, 1, thank you for your time. Thank you for your wisdom. And I'm really looking forward to the next time we're sharing the same space and we can have that shoulder to shoulder walk. I'm assuming it might be out in your neck of the woods, but it might be here. Who knows? There's some stuff I want to talk to you about. There are opportunities for us to go shoulder to shoulder in different parts of the planet. But I would say, we have a few minutes left, like 2 minutes. Is there anything that you would like to add as far as if people wanted to connect with you, or if people are interested in more of your work that you'd want to put out there, so that people are like, oh yes, and this is why, or this is what I should do to really, be engaged with Christian in a deeper way?
Well, first of all, I think you embody the very thing that I'm exploring in this conversation. I think the way in which you gather, host, connect people is daily practice. And so I just want to recognize that part of the reason I even have the privilege of being on this is because I've experienced that from you. And so I think it's something that many of us do intuitively in different ways. And I just absolutely adore your version of it. Here's what I would add. If I were to go back and answer your original question about technology, how to define that, so to speak, I would say technology is effectively whatever enables the conversation or the relationship. And it's also whatever gets in the way of it. And so if we can allow the conversation and relationship to be the center of all things, then I'm all for whatever analog or digital or other version of technology that amplifies that or enables it. I'm also just as comfortable shedding all of it as ballast and tossing it overboard. And so for me, it's always how to honor the balance between, is that thing enabling or is that thing preventing? And that's the technology. But I have no questions that the interaction between those two people or whatever scale of people is the only thing that matters. What I would add beyond that is over the last year and a half, when I launched Bonfire, which is the sort of consultancy side, the part that has the privilege of working with clients and doing projects in the more kind of design strategy way, I was behind the scenes creating something called Good Men that I wasn't sure where it was leading me. And much of what I'm also doing is exploring and testing these same principles when I'm able to create space for men to show up and be present for one another so that they can show up and be present for all of the people that they are responsible to in their personal and professional and community lives. And so what connects those two, the kind of Bonfire consultancy side and the Good Men experiential side, is this idea of works in progress. And effectively, that is what I'm spending my life doing, is thinking about what is that work in progress that honors us when we show up, as opposed to it's the thing we need to solve so we can move on to the next thing. And I think what you are providing conversationally is a version of that. This conversation is a work in progress, and we have a reason to start, and we'll figure out along the way where we're meant to go next. And I think that's also because the kind of ethic of care and the sort of the way in which you are is joyful and curious. And I think, my little quirky version, or my own unique version, tries to lean in the same direction. So I'm just grateful for the invitation, man. Thanks for the opportunity to be with you.
Of course. And, it's one of many and one of many more in the future. That's the way I've seen it. If this is your first time listening, thank you. It is appreciated. Come back. The water will always be fine. And if you continue to listen and you're like, whoa, this one was out there, great. Because you always have to have that one episode in the season where you're like, what is Coach Beard doing? That's a Ted Lasso reference, if any of you have seen it. Anyway, thank you guys so much for listening to Click Point. I appreciate it. I know Christian does as well. And we'll see you next time.